justice rising up like mountains. People round the world, come join your hands. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. Share and walk the golden road across the land. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. People round the world, come join your hands. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. Share and walk the golden road across the land.
Hello, I'm Dennis Ward of the House of McFadden, and I'd like to invite you to this constitutional discussion series for purposes of giving you an education as to the history and the background of how we came to be the country known as the United States of America. In this series, we're going to be looking at all of the founding documents and the historical aspects of those, along with many other books that were written by people with the benefit of hindsight, so to speak. And we'll be discussing specific aspects leading up to the Constitution. Thank you for watching. Well, hello everyone. My name is Dennis Ward, the House of McFadden. I've been asked to make a presentation on the Constitution and the historical documents that are associated with it, and give a little history of myself. I was born and raised back in the Detroit, Michigan area, Dearborn in particular. I never finished college. Although I went to many different colleges and studied a lot of different subjects, I figured that my study was my business and not some business of an academic advisor. I came to California in 1968, and I've been here ever since, although I have moved around quite a bit and have participated in a lot of different study and research groups over the last almost 30 years now. So that's a bit of my background. So what we want to talk about is the Constitution and how it came about. So to do that, we need to sort of jump into the Wayback Machine and go all the way back to April of 1775, when Paul Revere notified the folks in Lexington and Concord that the British were coming, and they were coming to seize the magazines in the two small towns there that belonged to the farmers. And when I say magazines, I'm talking about a powder magazine, and where they would keep their shot for their rifles, because at that time the black powder, gunpowder, was made with pig manure and other volatile components, so you didn't want to necessarily store them in your home. You wanted to have them someplace safe, so if they did explode, it wouldn't hurt anybody. This led to the confrontation on April 19th between the British and the colonists at Lexington and Concord, where they basically drove them back and sent them flying back to Boston. That led to the beginnings of the war in 1775, and by 1776 the colonists were pretty much under siege by, at that time, the most powerful empire on the planet, the British Empire. And that led the delegates to the what would become the Continental Congress to request a Declaration of Independence from England, and Thomas Jefferson was reluctantly given that task through some good persuasion by both Benjamin Franklin and James Madison and some of the other founding fathers. Despite what a lot of people think and may have heard, most of the people involved in that era, in terms of drafting the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, were young men in their 30s and 40s. They were businessmen, they were farmers, they were merchants with sailing ships. These were people, men of means, but they had a big stake in the colonies, and they were tired of being oppressed by the King of England and being taxed without any kind of they had no representation in Parliament at all, nothing. So Thomas Jefferson started to draft the Declaration of Independence in the springtime of 1776, and there were several drafts that were written and critiqued by many of the so-called founding fathers, and it led to the actual signing of the Declaration on July the 4th of 1776. Now, the interesting aspect of that is that the majority of the men who signed that basically pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, and many of them did not survive the Revolutionary War. By 1777, the various state assemblies realized that they had to have some sort of a beginning foundation for a new country, and so they set about to draft what was called the Articles of Confederation, which were basically approved in November of 1777. And the articles were designed to sort of bring the states together in a confederation based upon what most people do not realize is the Iroquois Confederacy, which was a confederation of the 7 Iroquois nations that basically lived throughout the Northeast, New England, and up into Canada, and they had a confederation of tribes and a very sophisticated government structure and a very sophisticated social fabric that had endured for centuries. So this was nothing new to them, and they realized that they were up against, along with the colonists, they were up against a very powerful adversary in terms of the British Empire. And a lot of the founding fathers took it upon themselves to study the Confederation, to study the Confederacy, and they drafted the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Now, here's what you need to know. These have never been repealed. These are still in full force and effect of law. And if you carry it forward to the 1860s and 1861, when the southern states decided that they wanted to leave the Union and go back and form their own separate government from the northern industrial states, they withdrew. That's why it was called the Confederacy. They withdrew under the Articles of Confederation because they were still in full force and effect, which then would give them time to draft their own constitution. However, a big war got in the way and that never happened. So after the Articles of Confederation, as the war wore down through the early 1780s, an eventual cessation of hostilities in 1783 and the treaties of Paris of 1782 and 83 with the King of England, the various states decided that they needed to basically set up a central government that would be able to handle the international affairs of all of the states, so that each state didn't have to do that on their own, which led to the founding of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, basically in about 1785. And each of the states sent delegates to the convention, and George Washington was sort of appointed the president of the convention quite reluctantly. A lot of these gentlemen, you have to realize, they had no problem serving their country, but when that was done, they were done. They just wanted to go home to their farms, to their homes, and continue on with their life. They had no intentions of being career politicians as we have today. The Constitutional Convention was a very contentious undertaking, to say the least. Not only for hours and hours, day after day, week after week, month after month, but continuing on into late at night in some of the taverns and bars around Philadelphia. Some of them are quite notorious. There was also, at that time and afterwards, there was a series of articles that were written by some anonymous authors that became known as the Federalist Papers, where they were talking about forming this federal government, this federal union, and why it would be necessary to do so and the advantages to the states, as there was also the Anti-Federalist Papers. At the conclusion of the convention and the signing of the Constitution by all of the delegates, James Madison, and a couple of others realized that they had missed something very, very significant in terms of, okay, we set up the government, we've basically formed the states, the federal government, and we have a new union. And when I say a new union, when you look at the preamble to the Constitution, the federal Constitution, it says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." So what they're referring to there is the Articles of Confederation. "To establish justice," which meant they needed to have a court system that would be responsive to due process of law and not the corrupt courts of the English Chancery, "ensure domestic tranquility," because during the occupation of England for a number of decades in the colonies, the domestic tranquility was of little or no concern to the king. "Provide for the common defense," i.e., in other words, they needed to have a navy to protect their shipping interests. "Promote the general welfare," and that doesn't mean you get your welfare check once a month, but the general welfare of the country as a whole. "And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity." Well, guess what? We're the posterity. "Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." And this was their attempt to bring to fruition about close to 30 years of conflict and turmoil in the colonies. When it was done, Madison realized we need to do something to protect the rights of the people, something along the English Bill of Rights, and so they set about to draft what became known as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, which were ratified on December the 15th of 1791. So it was approximately 2 years after the complete ratification of the Constitution that we also had the Bill of Rights. Now, to have a perspective on, say, the First and Second Amendments, the First Amendment was pretty much denied by the king in terms of their right to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievance, their right to worship as they choose and to write and speak as they choose. And the Second Amendment was because the king had tried to seize the arms of the people at the beginning of the war to render them basically defenseless. And along with all of the other significant rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights, the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, Sixth, and Seventh, and Eighth Amendment, those all address the usurpations basically of the King of England and people's basic rights to the due process of law and to be safe and secure in their homes. The Ninth Amendment says the delegation of rights not specifically enumerated herein are reserved to the people. So whatever you say your right is what you say it is. I can't defend your rights. Only you can defend your rights. If you have a right of avoidance, you have a right to peaceably assemble, you have a right to have a party on Saturday night. Okay? Those are your rights. Whatever you say is what it is, as long as you don't infringe on anyone else's rights. At that point, the Bill of Rights, the Founding Fathers realized that their biggest challenge in the coming years and decades was going to be the debt incurred by the war to the King of England, because the king financed both sides of the war. Isn't that special? Yeah, and he got to collect interest, and which led to another war, which will be a topic for another discussion in a few weeks. Thank you so much for watching episode 1, and I look forward to episode 2, where we'll be discussing the long-forgotten Articles of Confederation of 1777. Thank you.